Hi, everyone, and welcome back. And thank you for joining CCI Huronia today for our first Lunch and Learn webinar for the fall 2021 season. I hope everyone had a great summer. We here at CCI Huronia are ready to get back into the swing of things and back into our monthly webinar series. We're going to kick things off today with our first topic, and that's lessons learned from the recent and tragic condo collapse in Florida that happened in June of this year. I'm Sonia Hodis. I'm one of the many directors at CCI Huronia and a condo lawyer, as well as your moderator today. We are joined by a great group of speakers who are going to be talking about sort of the engineering side of what happened in Florida, but then we're going to also take it a step further and talk about emergency management and how do we make sure that we're prepared for emergencies, not just like what we saw in Florida, which was obviously very serious and tragic, but even for things that maybe are not as serious, but that may affect our condos. So we have with us today Mina Tesseris, who is a member of the CCI Huronia board and is with Arbitec. We have John Juffs, who is also a member of our board of directors, and he's with Macintosh Perry. We have Kevin Shaw, who is a board member from a fellow CCI chapter, and he's with Sion Coulter. And we also have Chris Pearman and David Tiller from the Office of the Fire Marshal and Emergency Management joining us today. Information about the speakers will be posted in the chat box along with their contact information. So what happened in Florida was a big wake-up call for condos, not just in Florida, but here in Canada. There's been a lot of talk since June in the industry about reserve funds and reserve fund planning and reserve fund site visits and the importance of these site visits and studies in the life of a condo. But it's also raised some questions about whether the system that we have in Ontario is sufficient, or do we actually need more? Currently, we're only doing site visits pretty well every 6 years, every alternative third year reserve fund study. But the question is, do we need to do more than that? Is there some benefit to doing more? And aside from the reserve fund issue, which is connected to maintaining our structures and avoiding situations like what we saw in Florida, the Florida condo collapse also has raised questions about emergency preparedness and whether we are really, really ready to handle bigger emergencies in our condo, even if they are not to the extent of the catastrophe that we saw in Florida. In July of this year, we experienced another Barry tornado, leaving extensive damage, property, and thankfully, the injuries were not extensive. However, whether it's a building collapse, a tornado, or maybe even just a power outage for more than just a couple hours, is your condo, your residents, your owners, the property manager, the directors, are they all ready to help themselves, help the condo, and help the first responders who are going to be coming on site? So we are going to start off the conversation sort of with our engineering panel, who is going to talk to us today about the Florida situation, what happened, what can we learn from it. We're going to discuss the importance of the on-site visits for reserve funds and their limitations, and what things you should be watching out for when you're walking around your property that may actually trigger more in-depth investigation by professionals. And then the second half of the webinar, we're going to take the focus away from the engineering side, and we're going to focus on emergency preparedness. And that's where our guests from the Office of the Fire Marshal and Emergency Management are going to come in, and they're going to talk to us about how we prepare ourselves and our properties. Michelle Farley, who is our resident fire safety consultant, is going to be joining us in the chat box. And she's going to be monitoring the chat box and answering questions there. And then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for live question and answer at the end of the webinar. So before we get started, there is one important thing that I must do, and that is to thank our sponsors on behalf of CCI Huronia. And I'm just going to put up our sponsorship slide. Without the generous support of our sponsors, we are not able to offer these webinars free of charge to attendees. And so we'd like to take this time to thank our sponsors: Macintosh Perry, Integrity Property Management, CWB, Maximum Financial, Aaliyah Associates Condominium Lawyers, Condominium Financial, and FCS Fire Consulting Service. If you're looking for any of these services, please feel free to reach out to our sponsors. And you can also connect with our sponsors by clicking on their logo on our website. Under today's event, that will take you directly to their websites. Give them a shout out. Thank you for their support. And I'm sure they'd be happy to talk to you. Also, I just want to make sure that if we have some new people to the webinar and they don't know who the Canadian Condominium Institute is, or CCI as we're usually referred to, we are an independent nonprofit organization formed in 1982. We have chapters across the country. In Ontario, we have 8 alone. CCI Huronia is one of those Ontario chapters, and for a couple more months, we're still able to say that we are the current winner of the Lauren Young Chapter of the Year Award for Tier 1. CCI's main objective is education. However, we also advocate for condos, and we represent all those involved in condos, from owners to directors to professionals, and we encourage all those stakeholders to work together. If you have not renewed your CCI membership, the renewal notices went out in July. If you haven't renewed your membership, do so. And if you're not a member of CCI but want to join, you can join the CCI Huronia chapter by clicking on the membership tab on our website, ccihuronia.com, or if you're looking for a chapter closer to you, you can go to the national website at cci.ca, click on chapters tab, and then on chapter locations, and you can find a location close to you. In addition, on the CCI national site, there is a resource center, which has a great deal of material available for review relating to many condo issues that you may be dealing with. And you can access that National Resource Center on the national website at cci.ca, and then click on the Resource Center tab, or you can go to the CCI Huronia website and click under Resource Center, and that will give you a direct link to the national website. It's a great collection of information from across the country and from our various chapters coast to coast. Also, CCI Huronia is on Facebook. Don't forget to like us and find out about our upcoming events by going to our website, ccihuronia.com. You can also find our newsletter on our website, but if you'd like to get onto our mailing list and you're not on it yet, you can send an email to admin@ccihuronia.com and ask to be added to our mailing list. Then you'll know when our newsletters are released. Previous editions are available on our website. And as this video webinar is being recorded, all video recordings of this webinar and past webinars are available on our website, ccihuronia.com, under the resource content tab. Just ask everyone to mute their phones and mics so that we can get a good recording without any background noise. You can also turn your cameras off during the webinar. If you have any trouble connecting with the connection, just end the meeting and log in again. And as a last resort, you can always log in by phone. These webinars are being recorded, just so that everyone knows that in advance. You can always put your questions in the chat box, but we will try to take some live questions at the end. And if you want to ask a question, all you need to do is raise your hand. If you're on your phone, press *9. If you are on another device, all you need to do is click the reactions tab and you'll see the raise hand feature. And finally, our disclaimer, the information that you're being provided today is general information and may not apply to your specific situation. If you are a condo director and want to use the protection of Section 37 of the Act, you do need to get an opinion about your specific fact situation from your own professional. The webinar is not intended to provide you with opinions that would protect you under Section 37 of the Act. In addition, the information provided today is current as of September 10th, 2021. As things are changing rapidly, the information provided today may not be relevant or applicable at a future date. Also, please be advised that any references to the Condominium Act or other legislation is reference to Ontario legislation. So without further ado, I'm going to pass this off to Mina. And Mina, let's get started with you. And you're going to talk to us about what actually happened in Florida. So over to you, Mina.
Thank you, Sonia. Hello, everyone. Thanks for attending the webinar. I only have about 5 to 7 minutes, I'm told, so there's a lot of information to cover here. I hope I don't go too quickly, but I'm going to preface everything that I say here by saying that the collapse that happened in Florida is still under investigation. And so everything that I say here today is there's some facts, which we know, and there's some conjecture. The actual cause of the collapse hasn't been identified and made formal. There's a lot of information out there as far as what may have caused the collapse, but everything that I say here is based on what I've been able to glean from various sources, but the investigation is still in progress. I'm going to start off by sharing my screen. And Sonia, please let me know if you can see this.
Yeah, we can see your PowerPoint, so you can just
Okay,
start your
great.
show. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so here we go. This is the building that we're talking about here today. Many of you have probably already heard the story of the collapse. It was really it was the unthinkable happening. When I saw it on the news, I thought, how on earth can this possibly happen to a building in North America? This just doesn't happen. So it was very, very shocking, just unbelievable tragedy. And trying to get to the bottom of what happened here is really where we can maybe come to terms with, how the accident happened and how to prevent it from happening again. This is a Google Earth view of the building. This building is located in Surfside, Florida. Surfside is I'll call it a suburb of Miami, just north of Miami. And this condo building was built around 1980. It's a 12-story condominium. It's cast in place concrete. You can see it's an L-shaped building. Outside of the building, there's a plaza deck, as we call it. Below this plaza deck is a parking garage, and you can see the swimming pool here. The important thing to see here is that we've got some planters along this side here. You can also see some dark areas, which I'll talk about here in a minute. The portion of the building that collapsed, if you can see my cursor, I'm going to draw across here, is everything this side of this line. So this entire wing here is what collapsed. In terms of the orientation of the building, the back side here that we can't see is the north side. This face here is the east side, and the east side faces the ocean. This is an oceanfront building. Just to the very bottom right corner of this image is the Atlantic Ocean. So the environment that this building is exposed to is considered a marine environment. And of course, we all know in Florida, there's hurricanes, high winds, a lot of salt spray coming off the ocean, landing in this exposed area of the plaza deck. This is a photo of the plaza deck looking back towards the building. So this is standing on the east side of the plaza deck beside the pool, looking west. The important thing to note here is these planters, these large planters that you see here. When I looked at the Google image, I just counted the tiles here. Each tile is about a foot long. And I know that because these little chairs are roughly 6 feet long. And so the planters, you can see, those are large planters. Those are about 6 feet by 6 feet by 4 feet high. And so that's equivalent to about 4 cubic meters. And 4 cubic meters, and the soil in these planters is obviously being irrigated to maintain the plants. And so soil that's in a saturated state is very close to the weight of concrete. It's about 85 to 90% of the weight of concrete. So imagine a 4 cubic meter piece of concrete sitting on top of the slab. The important thing is these planters were never shown in the architect's plans. So the structural engineer that designed this podium slab, this plaza slab, would not have accounted for the weight of those planters. Now, whether there was a permit taken out to construct the planters or whether there was a structural check done on the slab before the planters were installed, we don't know that, or at least I don't know that. As far as the incident itself, the incident occurred on June the 24th of 2021. Prior to the collapse, about in April of 2021, there had been a repair plan prepared by an engineer, and that repair plan had an investigation had been done before the repair plan, and in that investigation, the engineer stated that the waterproofing below the pool deck and entrance drive, as well as all the planter waterproofing, is beyond its useful life, and therefore must all be completely removed and replaced. The failed waterproofing is causing major structural damage to the concrete structural slab below these areas. Failure to replace the waterproofing in the near future will cause the extent of the concrete deterioration to expand exponentially. And so plans had been prepared by this engineer to do the structural repairs. And as I understand it, the repairs were either just beginning or about to begin when the collapse occurred. This is an image of the pool deck again before the collapse. And the important thing to see here is all of these dark areas that you see on the pool deck, that's water retention. That's water that's laying on top of the deck. So what that's an abnormal condition. That water should not be collecting on top of the deck. There should be deck drains that are functional that are draining that water quickly. What this tells me is that if there's water accumulating underneath the deck and it's not draining away, first of all, it's going to leak if the waterproofing it has failed, and it's also adding weight to the slab. So the collapse occurred on June 24th. Prior to the collapse occurring, there was a video, the now famous video of the tourist that was across the road at a hotel across the road that was taken 7 minutes before the actual tower collapsed. And what we know is that the plaza deck for the swimming and beside the swimming pool collapsed prior to the tower did. And that collapse occurred about 7 minutes before the tower collapsed. And we know this because of the video, and there were also reports of people in the building that had called 911 and stated that the pool had collapsed. So 7 minutes after the collapse of the pool, the tower came down. So what happened? What we know so far is that the plaza deck collapsed, and I'm going to slide over here and show another photo. There are images from another video that was taken by a woman who was viewing the building back in 2019 for the purpose of purchasing a unit. So she took a video in the parking garage, and that video shows a lot of very important evidence. One of the important things that we see in the video is the columns. This parking garage slab was a two-way slab, and on the engineer's drawings, which you can find on the Surfside website, the municipality actually posted all of the documents for this condominium days after the collapse occurred. So you can go on there, you can look at the minutes of the meeting that occurred in April. You can see the drawings for the building. You can see all permits that have been taken out over the history of the building. It's actually quite incredible considering how things work here in Canada and the difficulty that we have in obtaining that information. But anyway, going back to this photo, this is a photo from the video, and you can see here in this photo, this is the concrete slab in the parking garage. You can see all sorts of flaking. You can see stalactites hanging from the ceiling, which is indicative of water penetration. But the important thing to note is around these columns, there are no drop panels. And the engineer's drawings that were available from the city files indicated all the columns in this parking garage slab, or the plaza deck slab, were to have drop panels around the columns. And why that's important is those drop panels provide what's called punching shear resistance for the structural slab. What that does is it strengthens a slab in the vicinity of the column so that the slab doesn't punch through the columns. In fact, what did happen with the collapse of the plaza deck, according to the experts and according to what I've seen in photos as well, is consistent with a punching shear failure of that slab. So it appears that this plaza deck collapsed first, and what ended up happening was when the plaza deck collapsed, the lateral support to the columns of the building were lost. So imagine if we go back to the previous photos here, imagine this plaza deck disappearing, and that plaza deck is what's supporting the columns in this building. And when that plaza deck disappears, all of a sudden you have columns that are spanning from the second floor down to the basement with no lateral support from this parking garage slab. And when that happens, what that does is it weakens the slab, and that is what initiated the collapse for the building. The collapse, if you look at the video of the collapse, which are available all over the internet, you'll see that this is the area that collapsed first, and then everything else followed. So the lessons learned from this, what can we learn from the collapse?
Mina, can I just stop you for 1 sec? Can you just maybe give us the top lesson that we learned, and we can maybe come back to some of them at the end? Okay,
Sure.
Great. Thanks.
I'm going to give you two. When you're
Okay,
making
two's
changes,
good.
when you're making changes, always get a permit for the work that is being done, of course. And finally, as-built plans and design plans. This is important. I've harped on this for many years, but have your design plans available and your as-built plans available, because if the engineer that inspected this building didn't have access to the drawings, the engineer would never have known that those drop panels should have been there.
Thanks, Mina. So, it's a great summary of what happened in Florida. And even just you taking us through it, we can see, visually there were some signs there which may not have paid any attention to, but adding those things all up really and can end up in such a catastrophe. So now we're going to move to John, and John is going to talk about, in Ontario, we've got reserve funds and reserve fund studies, and we've talked about them. Almost everybody knows what they are. We're going to really focus today on just the inspection obligations and why that's important and what the limitations are of those inspections, and making sure that you understand that that may not be enough in terms of inspecting your building. So John, take us away.
Thanks, Sonia, and thanks, Mina, for a great summary of the collapse. In Ontario, oddly enough, one of the ironies of this story is that our initial Condominium Act was actually fashioned on, some say plagiarized from, the Florida legislation at the time. And then Florida abandoned their legislation over time, and by the 1970s really didn't have some of the requirements, whereas Ontario kept moving forward with various changes, and the most recent changes in 2012. But in 2001, May 5th, 2001, reserve fund planning became mandatory. And the mandatory requirements were basically making sure that every condominium has at least a plan in place to look after the obvious deterioration of the common elements. Of course, much of what collapsed in Surfside would have been common elements, I'm sure. I doubt the unit boundaries would be very much beyond the inside surface of the walls. So in Ontario, you do a reserve fund study every 3 years. One with a site visit and one without a site visit is the very most minimum requirement that you can have under the Act. So that means that you can, in theory, have a 6-year gap. Now, those of you who have read about the Surfside collapse know that the only reason it was being looked at was because it was a 40-year-old building, and Miami, in particular Miami-Dade County, had a requirement passed recently saying buildings approaching the 40-year mark have to get sort of an inspection, very much the type of inspection that a reserve fund planner would do here in Ontario at least every 6 years. Many clients of ours and many condominium corporations throughout the province think that every 6 years is still too long to get an independent set of eyes looking at it. You can imagine that if somebody like Mina or Kevin Shaw or many of the other good reserve fund planners in Ontario were coming every 3 years to look at buildings, it's very likely that they would twig on to the things that Mina showed us there, this dark stains, the lack of drop panels, the added planters, things like that would be cause for concern and addressed much sooner. And so while it's nice that we have that requirement, and it's nice that associations in the States are reaching out now to Ontario people and saying, how does this work? And we explain it to them. It's too late, of course, for the poor people that have died and lost, others that have lost everything in Surfside. Hopefully some positive changes will come back, and that Florida state legislature will realize that they should never have abandoned their course of the very legislation that inspired Ontario to go the way it has. Much of the things that reserve fund planners look for is, symptomatic. We see a crack in something, we say that's a symptom of deterioration, and then we recommend going a bit further, and I'm sure Kevin will have a lot more to say about that. But the main thing is that somebody with experience is looking at the condition of the building and saying, based on our experience, we know we do a lot of these fill in the blank, roof replacements, balcony restoration jobs, underground parking restoration. And we do them because of the symptoms that we see here in your building, and we know the costs of them. So you should plan on doing them in the next few years and so on. And even if it's not in the next few years, we still know that you have these common elements, and maybe in the 20 years or 30 years or up to 60 years, we fully anticipate and expect these sorts of things to be required. I'll just finish my comments with all of this, unfortunately, June 24th being my birthday, reminded me of the fact that on June 23rd in 2012, we had a collapse, not of a condo, but in Elliott Lake of the Algo Mall. And unfortunately, there's too many similarities between the two situations. Basically, owner apathy, or in the case of Algo Mall, downright owner deception. And we have to do better, and we have to exercise our due diligence in all respects and make sure that we're not sweeping things under the rug or rolling our eyes and saying, what do you know? How do you know the future? And so on. The reality is we know. And if experts are telling condo boards something that they need to be saving for, they should be heeding that advice and following it, no matter how difficult the message is. And, if the message is about money, well, so be it. It's about money. I'd much rather have, people with a little bit less reserve, a little bit less retirement savings and a guaranteed house to live in 10 years. And so I'll wrap it up there. I know we're pressed for time and we've got lots of other speakers that have to go. And if there's any questions, post them in the chat.
Thanks, John. So Kevin, what's you're going to talk about sort of things we should pay attention to, but why don't you start us off with what is one of the major limitations of the reserve fund site visit, and why can't you detect everything on those visits? Why are those visits not enough in terms of maintaining your buildings? And what are some things we can pay attention to that may give us that kind of aha, we need to bring someone in to take a look if directors or property managers are doing this themselves? Kevin?
That's a great question, and we're faced with that on a regular basis. It's always the debate of what the inspection is. As John said, we're coming in typically every 6 years. The inspection is a walkthrough visual inspection as conducted for the purposes of a reserve fund study. So it's moving through the building, all the common areas, etc., with a guide towards verifying what components are indeed there, general condition in regard to those components, looking for symptoms, as John said, of maybe different activities that are happening, keeping in mind, typical life expectancies of what we'd be expecting as we move through a building, depending on its age, etc. But it is limited to that. A lot of what needs to go on in buildings is with the owners and with the management and with the boards themselves. They're there on a regular basis. It's definitely good to have them part of those regular ongoing keeping an eye on things. And I'm going to touch a bit on that on some of the photos I'm going to show, which is as John described, symptoms of what things you should be watching for or paying attention to. But really those inspections are rather limited in terms of what they can accomplish. And what we hope is with your reserve planner is that they're going to mention if they come across certain symptoms, signs, or issues, that your additional recommendations can often be made in the reserve to follow those things up, which is not enough for us to see a couple of balconies as part of a reserve fund study. But if we're seeing issues, that we mention those issues in the reserve fund, and then have recommendations to follow it up, potentially to do a complete survey of balconies or a complete survey of the garage or areas like that to further investigate those early signs or symptoms and determine if there's something more that needs to be done or whether that's going to change the overall life expectancy, etc.
All right, thanks, Kevin. You're going to show us, you're going to have some show and tell now.
Perfect. So I'm going to share my screen here and just tear through a few photos and a few ideas on again, building on what we've been discussing so far and hitting some of the key areas that, again, as unit owners and as property managers and or board of directors can be keeping an eye on. So the areas I kind of want to focus on is interiors. That could be the units themselves, common areas, amenity spaces, mechanical rooms, etc. The exterior walls of your building, basement areas in your building, parking garages of particular importance, as we heard from Mina, and balconies as well. So I'm going to show you a few photos of some typical things that we come across. We're mostly calls from clients going, hey, we might have a symptom or a sign here. Can you come in and examine it? So in interior spaces, you're keeping an eye on finishes mainly, drywall, doorways or openings, concrete surfaces, concrete block surfaces, etc. So here's a typical one we got called on just recently, again, with the idea that people are a little concerned, and this is a crack in a common area hallway. the board called and said, well, we haven't seen this before. It cracked at this corner bead and across the ceiling. Is this indicative of something, going on? And so they brought us in. We did a full examination of these areas, and that's in the works right now in terms of fully determining if there's any real movement happening here, if this just turns out to be something very localized. Here's another, vertical crack that we got called into a unit. They said, hey, this crack appeared. We're not sure. Again, it's difficult these days whether people are becoming more vigilant or sort of hyper aware of cracking. But this unit owner said, hey, I have some vertical cracking in my stairwell. Is this a potential issue with movement? So something like that showing up, yeah, it's worthwhile to have it looked at, particularly if it just suddenly appears or somebody's noticing it for the first time. Doorway openings and stuff like that are an interesting one. This is a unit owner who's doing some renovations in their suite, and as part of that, he started to notice that a few of these doorways, and you'll see it here at the top of this one, are completely out of plumb. So you can see that gap is very different as it goes across the door, and again, indicated that they thought, this may be a concern that something could be moving here. And so, good intentions, called the board, and we were brought in to have a look while they did their renovations and see if there was anything else showing that might be further to this gap issue. Concrete ceilings, we got a lot of exposed structure these days in various condominiums as part of the finishes. And in this case, it's a concrete ceiling in a living room of a unit in a high rise. The unit owner had just moved in and noticed all these little hairline cracks sort of along the ceiling area. And we're again concerned if this was an issue or not. We were brought in and had a look. So it's the kind of thing you can recommend to all your owners if you're talking about sending out notices to them or keeping them updated and that kind of thing, that this is the kind of thing they can keep an eye on as they go. This is a large mechanical space in the building. In this case, large step cracking on that back wall appeared, and so was a concern with some movement going on. In unit masonry, it's subject to cracking with any kind of movement, and so something that can quickly be spotted and should be paid attention to. When it comes to the exterior walls, then often the exterior finishes of your building might be the first thing that start to show signs or symptoms of potential structural movement. And that include items like masonry or stucco or wood. And I'll show you a couple of examples. Masonry is one of them. Again, it's a unit, very stiff sort of system. If there's any movement in the structure, it's quite likely to crack. In this case, a unit owner called and said they had this step cracking happening above their patio door. And we arrived at the site. Indeed, it was fairly significant. And it turns out it was additional cracking underneath their decking in the masonry below there. And when we got down into their basement, turned out cracking in the basement as well. And so there was a further investigation into soil work and everything around that foundation, and indeed it looked like there was some movement that was happening. Stucco surfaces, again, quite likely to crack. In this case, it wasn't necessarily a cracking issue that had to do with structure. It was a moisture problem that someone had seen. They had cracking and all kinds of staining around it. We're starting to get worried that moisture was getting inside. In that case, we came in and said, well, we'll open up the area because we want to make sure the moisture hasn't damaged anything. And indeed, in this case, found out as soon as we opened up and removed that stucco, that the structure behind it, which was an all wood one, was being slowly eaten away by that moisture that was getting in. So despite the fact that it didn't start as a structural issue, was becoming one because of water penetration. And so again, something you want to keep an eye on and jump on sooner rather than later. These days, we're seeing all kinds of, interesting configurations with architects putting together buildings with lots of different materials all coming together in locations. In this case, we got large wooden beams being supported by steel structural supports, all hidden within masonry veneer with precast concrete slabs, all intersecting all together. This area is all subject to weather and environment and de-icing salts and everything else. And they had seen quite early on that they ended up with a lot of rusting and what then started to become rot in these wood components, etc. Now, when this was investigated, it turns out that this moisture had gotten inside the assembly, and there were further wood components and steel components in behind that were getting quite severely damaged. So again, watch for these kind of things and jump on them sooner rather than later and have them looked at before they can have the potential to become an issue. Basements is an important one. Obviously, in many cases, or most cases, this is the foundations of your building and where everything starts. And so foundation walls, concrete floor slabs, etc., should be kept an eye on. In many cases for townhouses, we get this kind of call, and the photo on the left is a foundation wall in a townhouse basement. You end up with these vertical cracks. In some cases, these are brand new fresh cracks, never before, and someone's calling to say, hey, this just appeared, or I've just noticed it. Can it be looked at? Floor slabs as well. So the one on the right is a painted floor slab inside a townhouse unit. And they had some hairline cracking that was in that floor, but had started to notice that it was expanding and moving across the floor farther and farther. And so we were called in to have a look. Again, something that can easily be kept an eye on and easily warn unit owners and your boards to keep an eye on these items and have them looked at. Not a bad choice. Parking garage is an important one. And as you saw with the images from Florida, again, this is an important part of your foundations and is subject to quite harsh environmental conditions, including all that water and salt and everything else that could go in there. So when it comes to those, again, something to keep an eye on, something we see regularly. So this is a ceiling inside a garage. It's the garage roof deck slab, as we call it, the top of the garage. And here's a very large, delaminated section where the concrete has completely broken off, exposed reinforcing steel there. That large pattern of staining all around the outside is water leakage staining, which means water's coming through from a failed waterproofing membrane and is rotting or damaging that structure. It's something not to be obviously ignored. It's something to be investigated, tracked, and repaired. Columns within your garage, also important. We see this on a regular basis, bases of columns where lots of water is splashing on here and potentially some salts, etc. And it starts to damage and deteriorate the concrete at the base of these. And right at the base of this column, you'll see that the section of concrete is broken off or delaminated, and you'll see the rusting reinforcing there. Again, something that shouldn't be ignored, something that should be kept closely monitored and repaired. Basement floor slabs, again, in a garage situation, we get calls all the time where there's cracking in the floor slabs within the garage. Much of this can turn out to be just shrinkage cracking, which is very regular and typical when you're pouring large areas of concrete. But in some cases have turned out to be the initial signs of movement, which in the case of one we had seen where the cracking ends up becoming circular in nature and is circling around locations like columns, etc., which can indicate the puncturing kind of issue that Median was describing. Balcony is another great one. Again, it's something that everybody has access to and you can keep an eye on a regular basis. And for most of the structures these days, we're seeing them either built out of concrete or built out of wood. When it comes to your concrete ones, similar to garages, you want to keep an eye on these areas. Again, they're fully exposed to the environment and subject to lots of moisture and freeze-thaw cycling. And often it just starts fairly simply. This is the photo on the left is an outside edge of a balcony slab right behind the railing. And so the unit owner started to notice that there was cracking running along that outside edge of that perimeter. Again, doesn't look terrible at this juncture, but the photo on the right is what it looks like on the bottom side of that, which from the neighbor downstairs, as they're looking up to the slab above them or the balcony above, you can see that there's a large section of concrete here all along the outer edge, which has completely broken off, exposed the reinforcing steel here, and is starting to spread inward and causing more and more damage as it goes. Again, something that shouldn't be ignored, both from a safety standpoint, which is in this case, that concrete fell off the building and down to the ground. And in the second case, obviously, these are the early signs of deterioration. And just as we're discussing, maintaining your diligence when you're inspecting and keeping an eye on it, obviously from a reserve fund standpoint, that can be done. But from a standpoint of making sure your unit owners are being informed and maybe as part of your spring walkarounds, etc., is the board can also be keeping an eye on these things as well.
Thanks, Kevin, I'm just going to cut you off there because we're running out of time.
Okay.
But
this is my last
your
one.
Last picture?
It is.
Okay, go ahead.
This one's super interesting. I just want to throw this in at the end.
On this one. I'll give you a pass.
This one's a wood structure building. I just wanted to show this because we'll see this balcony. It looks very good, but we got a call, and it was a unit owner saying, "Oh, the floor of my balcony feels somewhat spongy when I stand on it, and otherwise looked normal." But when we got out and tore it off, when we removed the membrane from the balcony, this is what was underneath. This was remains of the structure of that balcony, based on the amount of water leakage, etc., that was happening. And so, a report of a spongy floor on a balcony turns out to be as bad as that in those occasions. So further to what John was saying in terms of seeing symptoms is don't ignore them, definitely move on them. It doesn't mean you're looking at something as obviously tragic as what happened in Miami, but are the kind of symptoms you're watching for and should be, stayed on top of.
Thanks, Kevin. I think everybody's going to be doing some walkarounds this weekend or in the upcoming weeks. And, it's a good lesson. Those pictures are great because they seem aesthetic, like just aesthetic issues, but there's actually something deeper underneath them and they should be investigated so that you catch them early. Right. So thanks for that, Kevin. All right. So moving from sort of our engineering perspective of what happened in Florida and what we can do in our own condos, we're now going to move to the emergency preparedness side of our webinar. And we're very fortunate to have Dave Tiller and Chris Pearman with us today. And I think, Dave, you're going to start us off on the fire safety planning side of things. And then Chris is going to take over and talk more about the emergency planning. But I think this is going to be a really good discussion about what we can do as condos, condo owners, directors, residents, property managers. What can we do to help ourselves, but also help the first responders who are going to be coming to our condo? Hopefully not, but if they do, that we can actually help them to make their job a little bit easier. So Dave, you want to start us off? You're still muted, Dave. Okay, Dave, go ahead. You're unmuted.
We're okay now?
Yeah, and if you want to just start your show so that we can see the screens full screen.
Let me click that again. How's that?
And just switch the display. We're seeing your notes as well.
Right.
So on your display settings again? At the top.
We do that again.
Display settings on the top.
They're not there anymore.
Okay, just go with it.
I can just go with it. That's it doesn't really matter. My notes as a part of it. Anyhow, thank you for inviting me out. It's a pretty exciting time for us in this business because the fall is a lot of events like this. So we'll be doing a lot of presentations over the next couple of months, not just for folks like you, but fire service as well. I'm here to talk about fire safety planning, and my PowerPoint might be a little bit longer, so I'm going to talk fast. And there's going to be lots of opportunities for questions at the end. I'm going to talk about fire safety planning because it's a part of the regulation of the Ontario Fire Code. Within the Fire Code, fire safety planning is required in certain buildings. And I'm just going to focus on residential type of occupancies for today because that's all we're going to be dealing with. So a couple of things about fire safety planning is I want to briefly overview measures and emergency procedures that are a part of a fire safety plan and what is required for a fire drill. Because if you need a fire safety plan, then fire drills are required as well. First of all, what's a fire safety plan? Now, there's a whole bunch of stuff in the fire code that says you got to do this, and all that. But what is it? It's a unique document that's tailored to your building based on what's in the building and the residents of the building. Every fire safety plan is going to be a little different because every building is different and every residents in the building are different than the other building. Fire safety plan, there's general requirements from the fire code, but it has to be tailored to your building and the needs of the residents in your building. The owner operator, it's their manual to fire safety as well, because within the fire safety plan, there's a schedule of testing, checking, and inspections on life safety and fire protection equipment that's required. That is in the fire safety plan. So it helps the owner operator, and an owner operator could be your property manager, president of the condo corporation. It really depends on who's doing the fire safety plan. Important information for emergency responders. With this, I mean, in the fire safety plan, there's going to be a list, a documentation of equipment, fire protection equipment. Are there elevators that recall? Are there stairwells that don't go to the top or don't go to the basement. There's a number of things in the fire safety plan that's required for emergency responders as well. And we'll get a little bit more into that shortly. So we're just going to focus on residential occupancy. Residential occupancy is a place where people live, apartments, condos, single family dwelling units, hotels, as an examples. If there is a residential occupancy, such as an apartment building or a condo building that has an occupant load that exceeds 10, a fire safety plan is required from the fire code. That doesn't come into play during the building permit process. It comes in after, because the fire code is a different regulation than the building code. So what does it say? This part does not apply to individual dwelling units. And I'm going this route because Sonia said that we do have a number of townhome type condominiums and we have building type condominiums. So I've got to speak of both. In this particular case, fire safety planning does not apply to individual dwelling units. What's a dwelling unit? It's the place where you live. It's a housekeeping unit. It's your condo. It's your apartment. It's your townhome. Fire safety planning doesn't apply to your individual unit. So people say, well, what happens if I have a large family? It doesn't apply to individual dwelling units. You can have a large family of 12 people living in your house. It doesn't apply because the fire code doesn't apply. In this instance, doesn't apply to single family dwelling units. Owner, very important. In the fire code, the owner is responsible for carrying out the provisions of the code. An owner is an owner of a condo, an owner of a townhouse complex, but also within the fire code, an owner has a broad definition. It could be the firm, corporation, having control over any portion of the building or property that requires a fire safety plan. So it could be a very broad definition. It could be a property manager who's in control of the fire safety plan could be considered an owner for the purposes of the fire code. Fire alarm technicians that are doing work on the fire alarm system could be considered an owner for the purposes of the fire code. Very broad, only in the fire code. And the owner, we're going to get back to that a little bit later. Who does a fire safety plan? Okay, prepared by the owner. We know who the owner is. Is it your property manager? Is it the president of the condo board? Whoever is in charge of the fire safety plan. When it says it has to be approved by the chief fire official, that doesn't necessarily mean the fire chief. It means somebody who's appointed by the fire chief to approve plans such as this. The reason we do that is the plan gets submitted, the fire department reviews it for accuracy and may input their comments. They may add things or suggest that you add things. Implemented by the owner. The person who's in charge of it has to implement the fire safety plan, meaning they have to put into place the requirements that are in the fire safety plan. Approved location, that's usually somewhere in the front lobby. In the next slide, you'll see an example of a box. Fire safety plans have to be reviewed. Intervals not greater than 12 months. That's not reviewed by the fire department, it's reviewed by the owner to ensure that there's no significant changes. If there are significant changes, the fire department has to be made aware of it so that they can go through the approval process again. Remember, the first responders, as much information they can get about your facility is going to help them if they do have to come to your facility in the event of an emergency. So it's very important, fire safety planning, to keep that up to date. You may have seen a box like this in the front lobby of your building. This is a typical example of a fire safety plan box. It's there because if the first responders need to come out, they're going to go to the front door, they're going to get in, they're going to see this fire safety plan, they're going to cut the lock off, open up the box, and they're going to go through this fire safety plan looking for floor plans, looking for anything that that the first responders may be able to react to immediately, such as people that might need help to leave a building. There may be accessible issues with some folks. Great spot to put this information so the fire departments will know what's in there. Some of the things that are required in a fire safety plan, and I just pulled out some things. Emergency procedures. This is what you would see in your building, usually in the elevator lobby, a sticker such as this, which gives you an overview of the emergency procedures. This is for the occupants to follow. Now, some of the things that you need to ask yourself: do you know how to sound the fire alarm? Do you know how to call the fire department? That's going to be on these stickers that are going to be in your elevator lobby or somewhere that can be visibly seen. Also, provisions for evacuating occupants, including special provisions for persons requiring assistance. Very important. We need to get that fire safety plan updated as often as we can if we know there are people in the building that may require assistance to evacuate, or there may be special things they may need. Very important to get a hold of the person who owns that or who's in charge of your fire safety plan to get that updated on a regular basis. Do you know, as a resident, in the event of a fire alarm activation, what happens to the elevators? Have you looked at that? Because you can't use the elevators in most cases because they're going to be grounded. The fire alarm system is going to take over and it's going to drop the elevators, so you're not going to be able to use them in most cases, not all. Confining, controlling, extinguishing the fire. If there is a situation in your unit, leave the unit and close the door. Confine and control. The fire will not get outside the door if the door is closed. It's usually rated for, depending on the size of the building, there's a certain time rating that's attached to the door, to the closure. The door is closed. The fire stays in there. A little smoke will get out, but the fire is going to stay in there. That's the key. Close your door. Again, emergency procedure is going to be posted somewhere on the floor area. On every floor area, emergency procedures is going to be posted. And it's usually in an area where you're going to see it often, which is usually the elevator lobby. It may not be a sticker. It might be something more fancy, but this is a pretty simple sticker. So the measures that we talk about. So first there was emergency procedures for the occupants. The measures that we're talking about now is more for the supervisory staff and the folks that are in charge of the fire safety plan, because there's a number of things that have to be addressed: fire drills, control of fire hazards, maintenance, and alternative measures. But first of all, who's supervisory staff? Like, what the heck is that, right? Most people, it's a term that's used in the fire code, and it's only used in section 2.8, which deals with fire safety planning. So the supervisory staff definition in the fire code is somebody who has some delegated responsibilities under the fire safety plan. Anybody who's considered a supervisory staff in the fire safety plan has to be trained on the responsibilities that they have. Now, one of the things that comes up often is, who's the supervisory staff? I don't know, because every building is going to be different. But we must understand that in some cases, a supervisory staff may not be in your building. The supervisory staff shall be made available on notification of a fire emergency. Very important to know that who is considered supervisory staff in your building. Is there a secondary supervisory staff that may live in the building, where a primary supervisory staff may live off-site, and it's going to take a phone call to get them to come and assist? Very important for you to know who these folks are. The supervisory staff have to be trained, and they have to have a copy of their duties. They need to know what to do in the event. If supervisory staff changes, the fire safety plan has to be addressed, because new names have to be put in there. And folks should be aware of who the supervisory staff is, so that they can contact that person if they want to review the fire safety plan, or make some updates to the fire safety plan. Again, that could be your condo president, the property manager. I don't know, but there's somebody has to be in charge of this. Overview briefly of some of the measures that we talk about. Control of hazards. So remember, the owner is responsible. So you are a condo owner, you are responsible for your condo. You are responsible for your townhouse. Now, when you make it as a building, it's a large procedure. But if everybody does their part internally in their own dwelling units and follow some of these rules, then we may not run into larger issues. Monitoring cooking, safe disposal of smoking materials, flammable combustible liquids. Do you have any? You're not allowed, there's a certain amount of product that you're allowed to store in a single family dwelling unit. You're not allowed to store any flammable or combustible liquids on your balconies. What are you allowed to have on your balconies? Chris will show you some of the after effects of large storage on balconies. Oxygen tank storage, very important. The fire code does regulate oxygen tank storage, and it does apply to single family dwelling units. So reach out to your fire department, reach out to your property manager, or who's in charge of the fire safety plan, and ask those questions. Some of the things that are required in fire safety planning are fire drills. Depending on the type of building, the size of building will determine the number of fire drills that are required. What considerations should be included in a fire drill? Here, we need to think about who wants to be involved. Do the residents want to be involved? Are there people that require special assistance? What type of building is it? How big is it? Are there stairwells? Are there elevators? Is it what type of fire alarm system is it? There's a number of things that have to be considered before we can develop fire drill procedures. Now, the thing with that is frequency of fire drills, and I just kept with the type of occupancies that we're dealing with today. The supervisory staff is required to participate in a fire drill once each 12-month period. In a high building, typically over 6 stories, it's every 3 months. Bigger building, more people, more safety precautions. That's usually how it works. So who has to participate in fire drills? It's the supervisory staff. Nowhere does it say that the residents have to participate in fire drills, though we strongly recommend it, but it's not a regulation. I have been involved with some condominium buildings, and they had fire wardens for each of the floors, but that's internal. And your fire safety plan would address that. There was fire wardens for each floor, and somebody on that floor, when the fire alarm activated or during a fire drill procedure, that person went and knocked on the other doors to ensure that people are there, they can hear the bell or the horn, whatever it was, and to make sure they're okay and if they needed any assistance. Each building is unique. Not many people want to be involved with that. But then when you go to some buildings, a lot of people want to be involved with it. Again, fire safety plan is unique to each and every building. Okay, so now a single dwelling unit such as a townhome style of condominium, it doesn't fall within the scope of section 2.8, which is fire safety planning. There are other things that apply to single family dwelling units, and the ones I'm going to talk about are smoke alarms and carbon monoxide alarms. Very, very important. The building code requires smoke alarms to be installed. The fire code also requires smoke alarms to be installed. And in some cases, you may require carbon monoxide alarms. In a single family dwelling unit, your townhome style, usually you'll have a carbon monoxide alarm because you're going to have a fuel fired appliance, whether it's an oil furnace, a gas dryer, so on and so forth. In a condominium itself, like one single unit inside of a building, if you don't have fuel-fired appliances, you don't require a carbon monoxide alarm. That's mainly for the townhome style. If you have fuel-fired appliance or a storage garage, attached storage garage, carbon monoxide. Also, if you've been constructed after a certain time within the Ontario Building Code, then your dwelling unit is going to have not only smoke alarms, but there's going to be strobe lights attached to those smoke alarms, and they're all going to be interconnected. And if you do have fuel-fired appliance or an attached garage, you're going to have carbon monoxide alarms installed before you move in. So now, who's responsible to maintain the smoke and carbon monoxide alarms? And you can put it in chat if you want. One of the first slides I showed, who's responsible for the fire code? The owner is responsible. So inside of your dwelling unit, you are responsible to maintain your smoke alarms and your carbon monoxide alarms. How do you do that? Test them monthly. You may need to vacuum them from time to time. And then at certain times of the year, you want to change your batteries. So here are a number of links. I went into our website, the Office of the Fire Marshal and Emergency Management website, and there are a number of links regarding smoke alarms, carbon monoxide alarms, and home escape plans, which is very important for your single family dwelling unit. In a large building, we have fire safety plans. In a single family dwelling unit, you make your own home escape plan. And the links that are provided at the end of the PowerPoint, you can click on them and that'll take you right to the Office of the Fire Marshal's website. And that's about it.
Thanks, Dave. And we'll put those links when we post the video. We'll put those links under the video. So if anybody's looking for those links, they can get them there. So thank you. All right. So Chris, last but not least, we're slowly running out of time, but I'm going to get you to jump in here and continue this conversation. We focused on fire first, because it's probably the thing condos are going to have to deal with most often, but just on a larger scale of emergency preparedness, Chris, what can we do in our condos?
Thanks, Sonia. Emergency preparedness. Do
you want to just start your PowerPoint, start the show?
Sorry, thank you. Okay, perfect.
You're good, thanks.
Okay, let's jump right into emergency preparedness. And Sonia, I believe it was in your introduction there, you talked about needing to prepare for power outages for more than a few hours. And that's absolutely perfect. I think we can all remember back in 98, the ice storm in 98 impacted over 4 million people in 3 provinces. I know I alone was out of power on my farm for over 2 weeks. And you don't realize the impact that just the power outage is. The rural areas were hit really hard. People out in the rural area, if they don't have power, they don't have water. And obviously some people won't have heat. This is an event that took place this year, March in Bradford. I'll talk a little bit more about this. I don't know if this was a condominium or not. This is a berry incident of this year, quite recently, actually. And I included this because part of our preparedness is being aware of what's going on around you, not just in your building, but what's in your community. This one, they had a plan, hoping that this would never happen. It did happen. They activated the plan, and they saved a much larger disaster. So there's just an emergency shutoff switch in this facility. It was hit almost immediately when the fire occurred, and the 2 large tanks in the over to the right of that photograph, there are 30,000 gallons of propane in each of those tanks. Had they gone off, had that have created a BLEVE is what it's called, a very violent explosion, it would have impacted a very large portion of Barrie. So planning and practicing that plan and knowing what to do is absolutely, in this case, it saved a disaster. So some recent events that we've gone through, the Bradford apartment fire, and that was the balcony that was on fire in the last photograph. That was March 2021 of this year. Those people still have not been able to return to that building. This year, we've seen a huge number of forest fires, not only in Ontario, BC, across the prairies, California, resulting in entire communities being evacuated, a number of First Nations communities being evacuated. They don't know what they're going home to, if anything. Very interesting and quite recent, and this has been fairly quiet on the news. Down in Wheatley, Ontario, gas explosion. They had a plan. They were aware of this gas leak. They put in detectors. They had a plan to address it. The detectors notified them that there was a gas present. The fire department in the town evacuated the buildings. About 90 minutes before the two buildings disappeared, they exploded. No lives lost. And again, the Barrie propane explosion that I just touched on. So what can you do to be prepared? So be aware. That's a big thing. Look around at what's going on. Look for combustibles in and around your buildings. Where is your building physically located? My house, for instance, here, I'm about 50 feet from a major railway. I have freight trains carrying all sorts of dangerous goods past my house multiple times each day. Are you near a highway? Take a look at some of the transports on the trucks, or some of the transports on the highway these days. What's in them? It's scary what's that close to you. Make a plan. Build a kit, a grab and go kit. They're also referred to as a ditch kit, whatever you want to call it. If you get a knock on your door, and I'll use Fort McMurray as a good example, you might have a matter of minutes to evacuate your house. So have the important stuff that you need ready to go. Be informed. Again, that's knowing what's around you. Let's talk a little bit more here about being aware. Dave touched on it about storage on balconies. This is a photograph from an apartment building in Toronto, 2010. You can see a very large amount of combustibles gathered on the one apartment balcony here. And unfortunately, this was the result. And that fire resulted in the entire building being evacuated, with over 1,700 people being homeless. That was a Toronto community housing building. And it was determined it was a cigarette butt from another unit that started that fire. So very, very devastating, lots of damage within the building. Those people were out for a period of time. So let's talk about the safety plan here. So much like the fire safety plan within your building, your fire safety plan for your family is going to be unique to each family. So a communication plan, assign some responsibilities. Who's going to look after what? If we have to evacuate, who's going to grab the pets? We need to have phone numbers. We need to have email addresses. Where are we going to assemble? Think about a plan long before you have to put a plan in place. Evacuation plan and assembly area. so if you're getting out of, let's say there's a fire in your apartment, everybody's going to have a common meeting place down, we'll say, the east side of the parking lot, away from all of the traffic and the entrance. That's great, but if it's a much larger event, and I'll use Fort McMurray as an example of this, where they were evacuating because of the fire going to take out the majority of the town. If you and your spouse are loading up your vehicles and you've got 2 vehicles to go, you're not going to be traveling together. In a case like that, they had a little bit of warning. Hopefully they were aware and paying attention to everything that was going on in the news and social media. So you might want to have a second meeting place that's outside of town. So, for the Fort McMurray residents, well, maybe let's meet at the West Edmonton Mall. Review the fire safety in your home. Do you have any portable extinguishers? Dave talked about the smoke alarms and CO alarms. Early warning is absolutely key. Fires nowadays are faster and hotter. You don't have the time to get out of your residence that you once did. Planning for special needs. Anybody in your residence requires oxygen tanks, wheelchairs, walkers, anything like that needs to be considered. Pets are going to be stressed. Part of your plan is, do you have cages? Who's going to grab the pets? Who's going to, are you going to put your cats in cages and get them out into your car? Do you have a cage for your dog? Utility shutoffs. You may or may not be asked to shut off the power to your unit. Do you know where your electrical panel is? Do you know which one is the master breaker for it? Documents. This is a big one, and the people in Fort McMurray, or the apartments that left, Fort McMurray in particular, they went back. There's nothing left at those houses. Stuff like passports, copies of your prescription stuff, insurance policies, anything that you may need to replace. Make sure that you've got copies of the documentation. Sorry, I'm just got somebody else pinging me here. And most importantly, review the plan. Take a look at it on an annual basis. Update it accordingly. Sorry, my PowerPoint has frozen here. Just give me a second. There we go. So an emergency survival kit. So your power is going to be out for 72 hours. Food, enough for 72 hours as a minimum. And, the obvious in there, a manual can opener. That food, take into consideration, does anybody in your house have food allergies, gluten intolerance or lactose intolerance? Bottled water for 4 liters per person per day. Medications. Some people are notorious to waiting till that last pill is in the bottle before they go to the drugstore. You may not have that option to go to the drugstore. Flashlight, again, if your power is going to be out for more than a few hours. Extra batteries, first aid kit, hand sanitizer and moist towelettes. Again, this goes back, I think, back to the ice storm. I was out in a rural area. I had no power. I had no running water. Fuel for your vehicle or generator. Ice storm, perfect example. It hit such a large area. Gas stations all had gas in their tanks, in their in big in-ground tanks. They couldn't pump it for 3 or 4 days until they had generators hooked up. So if you needed to go somewhere and you were out of gas, you were out of luck. Again, we talk about the important papers, contact list, prescriptions, insurance policies, passport, birth certificate, anything like that that you may need to replace. Cash. This is a big one. I can tell you that I never have. My apologies. I never carry cash in my pocket. I do everything interact. During the ice storm, all that infrastructure technology was down. So always good to have, a certain amount of cash on hand. Ziploc bags, garbage bags, special considerations. And hopefully nobody's ever going to have to experience this or go through this. Have you got small kids, diapers, formula, anything related to them? Prescription medications, medical supplies and equipment, again, oxygen bottles, walkers, wheelchairs, electric wheelchairs, anything like that. Need to take that into consideration. Pet food and supplies, so litter box, litter for your cat, and probably one of the things that you need to take into consideration if you're going to have to evacuate is all this stuff going to fit in your car. Any other specific items to your family needs? Again, your survival kit's going to be unique to your family, and specific to your family needs. I think of stuff like, traveling with little kids. They're going to be bored. They're going to need to be entertained. So you're going to bring a game for them, deck of cards maybe. Do they have a special teddy bear, a special blanket that they're going to want to take with them? Any other special, specific medical needs that will require consideration. Once you get your kit together, put it in a closet where everybody knows where it is. Review it from time to time. This is a biggie. You don't want a kit that's 60 or 70 pounds that you're going to have to drag out. In the middle of an emergency, you're already under a lot of stress. Make it easy to carry. Make sure your cell phone and mobile device is always charged up, similar to keeping your gas tank on your car full. Charger and cables for your cell phone. That's going to be probably your main point of communication, with your family down the road. For the foreseeable future, you're going to need to be able to charge it. So be informed. Ontario has a very good warning system, an alert messaging system that comes out to your cell phones. And I've included this in here, and it's in the link where you can actually go to the various service providers and you can check to see if your cell phone is capable of receiving these alerts. Social media is going to be a very good source of your information. And the officer in charge. So if you're going to have a fire scene at your apartment building, maybe I'll just move right into this. Yeah, I'll get back to the officer in charge here for the sake of time. So if you need to evacuate, close the doors behind you. If the fire happens to be in your unit, don't lock your door, just close it. Closing the door is going to prevent the spread of smoke within the building. Hopefully it's going to limit the fire growth and the size of the fire. Do not use the elevator. As Dave indicated, the triggering of the fire alarm can cause the elevators to be recalled to the ground floor. You could be wasting valuable time going to your elevator, pushing the button, and nothing is going to happen. Head for the exit. Do not re-enter the building until instructed to do so. I was recently involved as part of an investigation where tragically somebody had safely made it out of the building and gone back in to try and rescue some other occupants or notify some other occupants. Unfortunately, that person did not survive. Gather in your designated meeting place. This one's absolutely key. Having been a first responder, I know this happens. Do not approach or impede the first responders. When those trucks are pulling up, each of those firefighters in that truck has duties that they already know what they're going to do. Let them get there, let them get set up. So in one of the previous slides, I mentioned officer in charge. You may hear officer in charge, incident command, also IC. Have somebody in that group in your meeting area be the single point of contact. So if you've got building superintendent that may have keys to the various rooms in that building that you need, have that person when it's safe to do so, approach incident command. They may be asked to provide entrance to the first responders. Maybe they've got keys to an electrical room that the first responders need to get to. Provide the relevant information to them. There may not be a whole lot of smoke left. Let's say fire in the laundry room on the 6th floor. We believe the fire's out. That's where it is. That's what the fire department needs to know. If someone's unaccounted for, so you've got a pretty good idea within your building, who's around it and who isn't. If somebody's unaccounted for, they're possibly at work. They might be sheltering in place within the apartment. Let them know at the appropriate times. And as Dave alluded to in the fire safety plan, hopefully this information is in the fire safety plan, but always good to back it up. If somebody new has moved into the building, or maybe they haven't had time yet to look at the fire safety plan. Links, and there may be some duplication of Dave's links here. And I'd like to thank Sonia for inviting, and this is on behalf of Dave and myself. Thank you for allowing us to present here. Planning and early warning, making sure that you've got those smoke alarms working and carbon monoxide's working, is going to save your life. So
thanks, Dave and Chris. Thank you for both joining us today and giving us that perspective that you have. And I think one of the things, before we start taking some questions, when I listen to your list of things you should be doing, a lot of the sort of the common denominator is you need to know your building. You need to know who the people are in your building. You need to know where they are in your building, if they're in the building or not. And I think that is something that condos struggle with, is getting that information. And we actually had a question at the very beginning of the webinar with respect to getting lists from people in terms of who's in the building, getting their contact information. And so just what are your thoughts on that, Dave? The question was, should condos have full and complete list of all residents? Can we force residents to tell property managers the names of everyone in each unit? Apparently that's not required by the fire code. But what are your thoughts on the benefits of being able to create those type of lists?
Well, the condo corporation has their own rules in place for each building. As for the fire code, we can't force you to do that, but just think about how much better it would be if the first responders were aware of vacant apartments or vacant condos because somebody went to Florida for 3 or 4 months. Somebody has their, a relative move in with them who is in a wheelchair or a walker or is hard of hearing, or whatever the situation may be. To get that into the fire safety plan could mean a lot in the event that something happens. Have a list of every person that wouldn't go in the fire safety plan per se, because it's not required in the fire safety plan. But when I was working for a municipality and we dealt with a lot of new condominium buildings that were being constructed, what we did was inside the fire safety plan box that was in the front lobby, there was a list of folks and apartment numbers that require assistance and what kind of assistance was required, and the units that were vacant for November, December, January, February. I got them to put that in there. That's because in a municipality, things, you can ask for certain things, because the fire safety plan, remember, has to be approved by the chief fire official. The chief fire official can ask for certain things. Nothing over the top, but items such as that is a good idea. And remember, it has to be updated every 12 months.
Thanks, Dave. All right, so we have a couple minutes left before we've got to wrap up. Does anybody want to ask a question live to any of our speakers? If you do, you can raise your hand by pressing *9 on your phone, or clicking on the reactions button and just clicking raise hand there. Any questions? Don't be shy. All right. There was a question in the chat box about fire safety boxes and whether they are actually are fireproof safes in surviving fires. Will they survive the fire? Dave or Chris, from your experience?
I can take it. Well, each of those boxes are going to be rated for a certain amount of time. The more you spend, the heavier the box is going to be, the more structure is going to be in it, so it's not going to burn. So they're all rated for a certain amount of time. So if you put your firebox in a closet, fire is probably not going to reach the closet as quickly as it would go through the living room or the bedroom, because the door in the closet is going to be closed, so it's going to protect it a little bit longer. Each box is a little bit different, so there's really no right or wrong answer there. Good idea to have one. I certainly do have one, and it's down in my basement.
Okay, thanks. And there's always the online version of things, which keeps it out of the place that's burning. So Mina, I just want to come back to you because I did cut you off and you weren't able to give sort of all the lessons learned. Do you have a couple more that you want to just add on as we wrap up today? You're still muted, Mina.
Yeah, it helps if you can hear. One thing I wanted to mention was at the end of my presentation, I did say as-built drawings and design drawings. The and design drawings was very critical in this Florida case because, again, if the engineer that's coming in to review your building is looking at a set of as-built drawings, that doesn't tell him how the building was designed, because in that case, in Florida, it seems that possibly there was a construction error and the drop panels were never constructed as shown on the structural engineer's drawing. And those drop panels, as I said, are critical to punching shear resistance. If you don't construct those drop panels as per the drawings, then you haven't constructed it to resist the loads that the engineer has designed it for. So when you're keeping copies of drawings, as-built drawings, of course, are really important because they give you an idea of what you'll find when you open the building up. But the design drawings from an investigation standpoint and just from an engineer's perspective of what the building was designed to do are also very important. That was one point. And the other thing I wanted to mention was, again, it's mind-boggling the information that's available on that condo in Florida. The names of all of the directors, that is now public information. Everything that existed in terms of the information within that condo corporation was made public days after the disaster happened. So when you're taking minutes of a board meeting, be very factual. Don't editorialize, just stick to the facts, and be cautious of the fact that everything that's in your records is, we're living in the information society. It is public. As much as you would like to think it's not, it's going to become public at some point if there's ever a situation like, a disaster or anything else that might open up a public inquiry. And that's all. I'll leave you with that, Sonia.
Okay, thanks. Well, it is now 1:31, so we've come to the end of our webinar. Thank you to all of our speakers today for joining us and sharing your experiences and your knowledge. It's been great. Everyone, don't forget that this recording will be available. We will also provide the links that were referenced in the PowerPoint presentations when we post the video, so you'll be able to access all that information online on our website at ccihuronia.com. I also want to make sure that we thank our sponsors. So thank you again to all of our sponsors: Integrity Property Management, FCS Fire Consulting Services, Celia Associates Condominium Lawyers, CWB Maxim Financial, Macintosh Perry, and Condominium Financial. We will be having another webinar in October, and you're not going to want to miss that. Our fall schedule is set. So our next webinar will be October 22nd at 12 p.m. Our November webinar will be November 19th. Our December webinar will be December 17th. More information about the topics and to register for any of these webinars can be found on our website, ccihuronia.com. Don't forget that CCI National is having a webinar on October 14th. Entitled No Reservations, Are You Paying Close Attention to Your Reserve Fund Study or Depreciation Report? So it's a bit of a takeoff and maybe further in-depth discussion in a different direction on what we talked about at the beginning of this webinar. So if you'd like to register for that webinar, just go to the CCI National website at cci.ca. In addition, the National CCI Conference is on November 13th, and information about that will be available shortly on the cci.ca webpage. If you have any suggestions for topics or speakers for our upcoming webinars, please send us an email to admin@ccihuronia.com. We would love to get your input. We try to design these webinars to provide information that is relevant to you and your day-to-day operations in a condo. So if there's something you would like a topic to be discussed, then please let us know. And if you have any suggestions for speakers, we would also like to know that. If you have not joined us on Facebook, please do so. And if you are not on our email list and you're not getting all the emails of updates of things that are happening in and around CCI Huronia, you can send an email to admin@ccihuronia.com to be added to our email list. And also don't forget to check out our other chapters throughout Ontario who are holding upcoming events. You can check out CCI Golden Horseshoe at cci-ghc.ca, CCI Grand River at cci-grc.ca, CCI London at cci-sw.on.ca, CCI Eastern Ontario at cci-easternontario.ca, CCI Toronto at cci-toronto.org, and CCI Windsor at cci-windsor.ca. They all have upcoming events in the next month or so. So check out their websites and register for their events. So until next time, I'm Sonia Hodes from the entire CCI family to yours, wishing you a good weekend. We hope to see you at our next webinar on October 22nd. And don't forget that CCI is your condo connection. Have a great weekend, everyone, and we'll see you next time.